Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the CEO of MuellerFootball.com, host of the Football GM podcast, and the 2000 NFL Executive of the Year. Please welcome Randy Mueller to the program. Randy, great to have you on again. How are you?
Hey, John, good to be back. I appreciate it.
What do you make of this crazy NFL offseason, first off?
I'll tell you what, there's been so many deals that I think in any normal offseason, any one of these deals would have probably carried us through the offseason. But there's been a half dozen, maybe 8 or 10 of them that I just shake my head at. I credit the GMs for being willing to take swings, and I credit other GMs for being willing to cut the cord. Deals are not easy to make, especially when the volume of dollars that are involved. That always adds an intrigue and an element of, a lot of us didn't have to deal with back in the day. The paper trail that is now left behind makes for an interesting dynamic when regards to trading players nowadays. So it's been fun to watch. I don't know that we're done yet, but we seem to be focused a little bit on draft now and maybe a few restricted guys that are still making the rounds, but hopefully it's settled down a little bit.
Why none of these deals happened when you were GM? Why is it all now?
That's a good question. I think there were deals that were made, and I went back and kind of traced my own past, and I was part of 3 or 4 or 5 first round pick type deals. And I think those are big deals when you're talking about swapping first round picks for players. Been a part of some of those. I don't know now, except that I think the aggressiveness of ownership, they've allowed GMs to be aggressive. They've pushed it. And when I was the GM of the Seahawks, Paul Allen and his group, when they took over, I'll never forget, they told me to get us in the middle of every deal you can. We can always say no. This was Paul Allen that obviously owned the Trailblazers and had been involved in an NBA style of traders, so to speak, kind of carrying over it into the NFL. And I actually loved it. I was young enough where maybe I was just dumb, John, but I wanted to be in every deal. And it was music to my ears that they pushed me beyond my even own comfort zone. So I think you see a lot of owners now that are willing and able and flush with cash to be aggressive. And I think that's a good thing for the league. I mean, you've seen the narratives throughout the offseason, what it's done. Hey, March Madness is now associated with NFL free agency in my mind. That's how crazy it's been.
When you were GM back at your time during free agency, what was your schedule like on a day-to-day basis?
It was hectic, to say the least. I happen to recall this only last week because I had to go to the dentist for some dental work. And the dentist that I have has been with me for 35 years, right? He's been there through thick and thin. And there were times during free agency that I looked forward to going to the dentist. That's how hectic your schedule was. And that's what I'm comparing it to. I remember, and we laughed about it. He said, I remember when you came in here and said, just give me the Novocaine and put me out, It gave me some peace of mind. But that tells you how your life evolves, in that if you can find peace of mind in the dentist chair, God bless you. And that's really what the life of a GM is like. I absolutely loved it because some of us do our best work when put into a corner and having to multitask beyond even what we could discuss on a show like this. And I absolutely loved it. I think these guys nowadays have to deal with a lot. And even like we said, the cap part of it, the medical part of it, it's always been there, but I just think they're more willing to gather their thoughts and pull the trigger on deals than as a group the GMs were, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
What's the process in signing a free agent? How does it work from start to finish?
Well, you first identify these players throughout the course of the season. Once your season winds down, we would sit down as a pro scouting department, much like you would do a month later with your draft guys and your scouts on the college side. But I wanted to know, as soon as our season was over, what we thought and if we could come to a consensus on some players that we thought were going to be available. The other thing you do is you want to have an idea early on maybe who some cap casualty guys might be. So that's like another element of building your team, where you're going to get players, for example, like a Bobby Wagner that's still out there, somebody like that, who I think most teams probably, predicted he might come free. So we would do that during the month of January, along with going to college bowl games and maybe meeting for the first time with our college scouts on our draft board, but we went through our whole free agent process and developed for lack of a better term, a draft board for NFL free agency, aside from the draft itself. So the worksheet started then. You would identify needs, fits. I always like to involve our coaches as much as we could in that free agent process, because staffs are made up from all walks of life, and a lot of our guys came from other teams. So there is a little bit of recruiting in free agency to where the familiarity helps. So I would involve our staff if for no other reason. Obviously, we would get the evaluations from their angle to add with what we had with the scouts. But the matrix of combining a guy's past with players he may have crossed paths with, so that kind of takes into effect as well. But the process really gets heavy in February once you go to the combine, but your work is done for the most part. Your boards are set for free agency. You kind of already have it in comparison with what's going to be available in the draft. So you can kind of work them both at the same time, if that makes any sense. But you kind of know ahead of time, and then you start setting up meetings with and conversing with agents. Obviously, at the combine is really when that first starts. So time flies when you're done with your season. I remember this one time coming home from New Orleans. In fact, we had lost a playoff game in Minnesota. And on the way home, John, I remember having looked around the plane and everybody was spent, right? Everybody was sleeping. Everybody was tired. The only light I could see was the one shining on my tray table. And I was making a list of what we had to do the minute we got back. So the off season starts. It started for us that night when we were flying back to New Orleans after the end of our season. That's how quickly you have to be ready to roll. So we start, we get through the off season through free agency, and then we hit the draft, and you're just really on a mouse wheel the whole time. You never get to step off unless you go to the dentist.
Randy Mueller here on Sports Talk Chicago. You mentioned something really interesting. So you talked about getting coaches involved and potentially crossing paths with other players that you might be recruiting. Is that a way to avoid the tampering problem?
Well, I think sometimes, I don't know that we ever avoided the tampering problem. I get a kick out of the legal tampering term that the league office put on the NFL. Really, you always can converse with agents about a million things, right? What do they say? 80% of the players have 10% of the agents. So there's a few power brokers that kind of, let's just face it, you're conversing about all their players for the most part. I ran into guys in lobbies with a list, a legal pad of here's my 20 guys. If there's anybody you want to talk about, let me know. So I don't know that anybody ever thought it was tampering per se, but the name the league gave it was, there are certain teams that would complain to the league office about having their players talk to. And the league just finally said, hey, we can't police this stuff. Forget it. Just grow up, put on your big boy pants, and we're going to call it legal tampering. So stop bothering us at the league office.
Did you guys ever violate it, or did the league ever come after you for doing that?
Well, I don't know if it really, we weren't breaking any rules. Everybody was doing the same thing. Everybody was conversing with players for the most part. No, nobody ever, challenged us as to, hey, we weren't blatant behind the scenes tampering either per se. So it was kind of an unwritten rule. And again, that's probably why they named it legal tampering, because it was an unwritten rule already that you could converse with agents. And it's hard to police the kind of communication that happens on a daily basis in the NFL between agents and front offices. It just happens. And the same with the media as well.
Let me ask you this. Larry Ogunjobi here in Chicago. So the Bears signed him. He failed his physical, didn't work out. What do you make of the whole situation?
Physicals are a big part of the deal. I would only start by saying no deal was ever official until the physical was passed. And we made sure that every deal we signed was pending a physical. Hey, you're talking to the guy who had a deal done with Drew Brees in Miami when the physical came back and failed him. So there was a gut ache in our stomach then, as I'm sure there was for Ryan Poles when this deal happened. That part of it is out of your hands. You might give them a history of the information and the medical stuff, but hey, I am not qualified to be a doctor. I've stayed at a few Holiday Inns, but can't consider myself being up to speed with Doctorsville, so to speak. And I didn't even play one on TV. So it's a bad deal. It's hard. It happened to us in Seattle. I can remember a time or two when we signed a free agent, a guy I really wanted bad, an offensive lineman who's on TV now, as a matter of fact, and known for having about 21 different knee injuries. And so that's part of the business, right? You've got to check boxes before any deal is complete. That's why I would get nervous when an information might leak out from an agent that said, hey, the Seahawks have agreed or the Bears have agreed. It's not a done deal until that physical box is checked. So tough spot. I think they had to let that one go and move on as quickly as they could. Doesn't mean they don't have feelings for the player or feel bad for him, so to speak, but our doctors are involved and they're part of the process, and they should be.
What happened with the Drew Brees situation? I didn't know you guys almost got him in Miami. Oh,
no, that's pretty a common story told many days since. Nick Saban was the coach. I was the GM. Drew was a free agent. He was between New Orleans and us. He had come to Miami really for really what was a formality. We had kind of decided that this is what we wanted. He wanted it. Tom Condon was his agent. We kind of had a verbal parameters of a deal, so to speak. And then he failed the physical. And that's common knowledge now. The next day he ended up signing with New Orleans. So it was a tough deal. And just think about the fortunes that changed over one physical. So yes, they are very important.
Do you have any regrets today or no?
Well, here's the thing. Most of the time, the dynamics of the medical side are tied to some other place within the organization. It just so happened in Miami, the doctors were good friends with our owner. So it wasn't like we could go against what they said. Everybody says, well, you can hire new doctors if you don't like what they tell you. No, that's not true. You can't do that. I know Ron Wolf tells that story, but that happened to him in Green Bay. He just hired new doctors. Well, we didn't have that option. We could not do that. And we couldn't go against their word. So we had to take what they had given us and move in a different direction. Therefore, we couldn't sign Drew Brees.
What made New Orleans approve him for the physical and not your doctors?
Different doctors, different criteria, maybe a different level of desperation sometimes. There's just a lot that go into these things. Maybe, it was funny. Mickey Loomis, my best friend at the time, was the GM of the Saints. My brother worked for the Saints. So by us not being able to do it, obviously they had no problem pulling the trigger. And maybe they could hire new doctors if they didn't get the answers that they wanted to sign Drew Brees. I say that tongue in cheek, but that's just the way it works out. Every doctor's got a different opinion of where you're going medically and what he's willing to take on as risk. And we just have to listen to him.
So did Ryan Poles do the right thing?
Oh, 100%. You can't go against your doctors. I think that's an investment in a stock that your people deem to be flawed for whatever reason. You can't go against that. And I don't think many teams would, to be honest with you. Everybody would handle it just like he did.
Randy Mueller here on Sports Talk Chicago. Randy, why are the Bears being so patient right now?
I think the Bears are not in need of winning press conferences right now. I think they are in a rebuild. And I think the value that they will find over the next 3 weeks might surprise people. They're not one or two players away from being a Super Bowl team, in my opinion. So they've got to build it a little different way. They've got to identify younger, ascending core players and bring them on board in some capacity. Most of those guys aren't willing to sign right now. They might be in a month. And I think it's all timing for Ryan Poles and the Bears in the way they're building the team. So I wouldn't be too discouraged. In fact, I would be encouraged. I like the idea of them not going out and the first couple of weeks spending a bunch of money on a high-priced guy off the street that, we need 5 guys. We don't need 1 guy. That type of thinking,
Is the rebuild the best option for them?
Well, I think every year is a partial rebuild, John, to be honest with you. That's just the NFL now. You've got change, and the only thing for sure is going to be more change next year. A third of your roster changes every year, and you as a GM have to be more than a talent evaluator. You've got to be a valuer of talent and a team builder as much as anything else. So we'll find out if they're doing the right thing. I like the approach where they're at now. They've got to be somewhat cautious. That doesn't mean they won't make some deals at some point, but I think they're trying to set up their core for the long haul, not necessarily to what gets them a win on September 10th next year.
How do you feel about the Khalil Mack trade?
Well, obviously they're going through a scheme change, a new coaching staff. So I'm assuming that their position was, we're not sure how this fits. The Chargers are willing. His cap was giant. There's 2/3 of the teams couldn't take him just because of cap reasons. The Chargers love it because they don't have to pay any money up front. So they have cap space for sale, so to speak. And cap space, as we're finding out with these deals, that's value. So people are selling cap space really to get players. That's part of the negotiation now in compensation. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. This regime didn't make the move for Khalil Mack. This scheme didn't necessarily fit perfectly. So, I think it's time, it's a place, and that's another example of they're not necessarily not trying to win in September this season, but they're setting themselves up for the long haul. And there's going to have to be probably at some point a redoubling down on money for Khalil Mack. And they just said, hey, why not do it now? He's not going to be in the long range plans.
Do you expect any more moves from the Bears moving forward?
Well, I think the moves that I would be looking to make, and that I think Ryan is, and again, I don't know Ryan Poles. I'm just observing from afar. He's looking for younger ascending players, like the restricted free agent, from Buffalo that they signed to the offer sheet. Guys like that who can be around a little bit at a right number. So I think that's what their moves are going to be. Maybe fewer and far between, but core players are what they're looking to identify. And if it means they don't get any core players out of free agency until May, so be it. They might sign a few, several guys once the price comes down. You just don't know where the thinking is on some of the guys who have had expectations dashed with regard to money. And then they've got to focus on the draft here at some point, and hopefully they can, find a few guys that again can identify as core players in their schemes. They don't have to find the best players; they have to find the best guys for them, if that makes any sense. The best guys that fit in their schemes.
Who would be the best guys? What needs should they address?
Well, I don't know what their schemes are designed to produce, but my guess is the first week they all got there, they set a criteria by position of each guy knowing exactly what we're going to ask him to do when he comes here. That's really the number one goal when you get a new staff together, is getting everybody on the same page as to what we're going to do with our guys at every position, and then identifying the traits that we're all going to be looking for. So, not knowing what their schemes are, it's kind of hard for me to say what they view as. Obviously, the offensive line has been an issue in Chicago the last couple of years. I was kind of discouraged that they lost James Daniels. I thought he might be an option for them at center, but they have other ideas because he played center at Iowa. So I didn't love that move. I didn't think his number that Pittsburgh paid him was that great. I thought that he could have been a core player going forward. So I'm anxious to see what kind of group they put together there. Again, you can't go wrong redesigning offensive fronts and defensive fronts, especially that front seven for Matt Eberflus and what his scheme is on defense. So you can't have enough new guys that fit what they want to do.
How about when you go about the draft, how'd you do it as a GM?
Well, I'm strictly a build by consensus guy. I don't want to be right and have to have you be wrong. Guess what? I think the truth is in the middle somewhere when we look at players. So I'm always been a consensus guy. I'm not in draft for need guy. I wish I could say I've never been a part of that, but I spent a few years with a club or two where they thought they were one player away, and drafting for need in that regard, I have not seen it work out. Everybody always says, well, this team's at 8. What do you think they should go for? I think they should go for the best player. That's what I think they should go for on their board. So, and that can be boring to some, but I'm not going to bypass players on our board to fill a need and draft a guy in the third lane or the third line of our board and pass over guys that we have greater valued and we spent all year valuing them. So I'm kind of an old school traditionalist when it comes to let's pay the homage to what the work we've done for the whole year and kind of stay true to what the board tells us. We're the ones that lined up the board. If we just get the guys who we all have consensus on and we like, we're probably going to have a pretty good draft. So that's just the idea. I do hear a lot of people talk about just because we have a big need to push players up based on our need, push them up in the draft process. I think you're playing with fire there, John. I really do. I think that's hard when you're looking to fill needs and dipping outside value pools to push them up to fill those needs.
Is that more common today in the NFL?
Well, I think it's common in prognosticators' eyes. I think it's common in analysts' eyes. I think it's really common in mock draft people's eyes, and they do those by the dozens, as you know. So as a GM, I would probably more so than ever before, and I was like this when in the chair, I would tune all that out. I would go weeks without even turning the TV on, and not in a disrespectful way. I don't have time for all that garbage in my mind. I can't put out all the fires that they're looking to start on a TV show or even, radio or media or whatever. I just can't do it. And again, it's not to be disrespectful. I've got an idea of what I think and like, and the people who I trust and actually know what we're looking for are with me in the room. So we always would say, let's just tune out anything outside this room. So I think that's the challenge. And when you don't tune out the outside world, I think you make some of these need-based picks that get you in trouble.
Did the Bears make a need-based pick in drafting Justin Fields?
No, I think they valued him. I think they thought that and I think this will play out. I actually like Justin Fields a lot. I think they did the right thing. It was hard because they were betwixt and between. They didn't really have time to develop a young guy, as it turned out. But that's what we kind of knew that going in. That shouldn't have surprised anybody. So they were just in a tough spot. I think Ryan did the right thing. I think Coach Nagy did the right thing in drafting Fields. They just didn't get enough out of him in year one to show hope that, hey, this is the right direction. That's all. But no, I don't think they overdrafted him at all.
So you never read a mock draft? Never? You never pay attention to him? Never read one before?
Here's when I would do it. The once our board is set, once we know exactly what we're going to do, we're not going to move any cards. We always used to laugh. There's no cards being moved at nighttime. We're not having a midnight all-star game in the Bears draft room when everybody goes home 2 days before the draft. So once it's set, then I would use everybody's mock draft to do mock drafts, to go through one by one, every one of them. The crazier, the better. I want to converse about them all. I want to talk about them all. But it's a time and a place, right? So that was the last thing we would do. All I'm using that for is so I'll know if that scenario comes up on draft day, we will have talked about it, and I know exactly what we're doing. So we might do 100 of these mock drafts, John, the 2 or 3 days before the draft, when the hay's in the barn. We're not using them for the purpose of moving any cards or changing our thought. We're just strategically. It's like a walkthrough before the game. I want to have a walkthrough every game. I want to have 5 walkthroughs if we can, because I don't want anything to surprise us. And because I think we used to do a lot of that, the dialogue on draft day, everybody used to say, oh, I'll bet you the draft room's crazy. It was minimal. It was quiet. Everybody knew we'd already talked about everything that could happen. So why would you not use it any different than coaches do game plans, the whole bit? So we've talked about it. I'll just give one quick story. Sorry to bog us down, but one time in New Orleans, we did these mock drafts, and we had Ricky Williams as our running back. And the mock draft, one of them that we did 2 days before the draft, threw us Deuce McAllister at 21 in the first round. And I had in the back of my mind, I always liked Deuce and thought it would make sense for us. There was some trust factors with what we do with Ricky long-term, and that was a whole nother story. But I remember us going through one of these mock drafts 2 days before the draft, and it popped up that Deuce McAllister is going to be sitting there at 21. And I remember Jim Haslett, who was our coach, looking at me and said, now what? I said, we're going to pick him, because he was like the 8th guy on our board, right? And he's available at 21. So that again sold me that the value of mock drafts are in preparing for all the scenarios, not necessarily for helping you set your board at all.
Randy Mueller, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Randy, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, is it true that you signed a free agent from the trunk of your car?
I actually signed a couple of them.
Really?
During this time. Yeah. And this is probably dates me a little bit. It might be before your time, John, but there was a time in Seahawk history where Ken Behring had owned the team. He was the owner, lived in California, a developer from the Bay Area, where he was going to move the Seahawks to LA. Dennis Erickson was the coach. Mickey Loomis and I were running the front office. And I remember him calling us in Super Bowl Sunday. The Super Bowl was in Arizona, and he gave us his plan about how he was going to move the team. He was trying to get a new stadium in Seattle, and the only hammer he had was to move the team. And so 3 weeks later, after our season ended, trucks came, moved all of our equipment to LA. We were in Rams Park in Anaheim, California, and that's where the Seahawks were setting up shop. We had no offices. We had no nothing. We were going to have to remodel this Rams Park and make it into a practice facility. In the meantime, free agency was starting. It was February at the time. It started earlier back then. The new league year had started. And so we opened the trunk of a car rental, and Mickey and I had notes spread out all over the trunk of the car, the hood of the car. That was our office. And I remember we signed Darrell Williams, a Pro Bowl safety. We signed Mike Sinclair, who was a Pro Bowl pass rusher. We signed Dean Wells, our middle linebacker. We signed a whole bunch of deals in a couple days out of the back of our car. So it sounds like a crazy story, but it was just a crazy time in Seahawk lore. And we had no offices. We ended up coming back to Seattle and working out of a Marriott courtyard, I think, not too far from where our office was, because we couldn't go there because they had bomb threats from the fans in Seattle, didn't want us to leave. So it was a crazy time, but yes, it was true. We signed guys out of the trunk of our car.
Is that the most bizarre place you've made a signing? Is there anywhere else?
I've had some interesting places where I've signed guys. Dave Dunn, longtime agent in the business, good friend of mine for years. I grew up in northern Idaho, a little logging town, and there's a little lake town called Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but he had 3 draft picks one year that we drafted in Seattle. So he had 3 of them. And we did all 3 of them over a beer and a napkin, listening to a concert at the on the lake in a couple lawn chairs at a resort. So that was up there as well. But I always get a kick out of that. One of them was Chad Morton, who's been a longtime coach in the league forever, and we always chuckle over it. But yeah, I would say that the trunk of a car had to be up there near the top. That's for sure.
Randy, before we finish up today, last question: what do you do with your gear after you were fired from a team?
Well, it's funny. I think we probably both saw the video of Mike Mayock and his story to Dan Patrick on his show about him going to the fire station. I took 3 or 4 hefty bags full of dolphin stuff when I left there to a shelter in North Miami, and had all my stuff in it and dropped it off to them. And talk about a scramble of grateful people. It was one of the best things I've ever did. And I'll never forget it. Those guys were so happy to get it. And they're all big Dolphin fans, as you could tell, or I would imagine. And they just went through it like crazy. The only thing I made them do was say thank you. And they all did. And it was awesome. So I think all of those things don't get talked about enough. But I do think people, for the most part, want to make others feel good, even if it's at their own expense,
Randy, thank you so much for joining me. Amazing insights. Best wishes to you in your future, and looking forward to the next time we chat too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.